Okay. This may be this may be the last time we try doing it like this. That really sucks, man. Who remembers the last thing you actually heard me say? We got people coming back here, hopefully. Why? Of all things, why? Universal? You guys suck, man. YouTube, you guys suck. Google, stop. Stop. Anyway. Okay. Okay. Won't play any clips. Won't promote your damn movie, Hollywood. Who who are you people? I bet you anything it wasn't a copyright strike. I bet you I got taken down for wow. I don't mean to stoke any conspiracy theories, but I do find it interesting. It was once I started talking about food stamps. Maybe I won't use those. Maybe I have to use coded language. Do I need to code language, friends? We're going to get our audience back here. What few people may actually want to come back. That sucks. That's definitely going to be a complaint from me. I won't make any difference. Nobody will care, but you better believe I'm going to complain to somebody. At least it looks like we are actually live again. Says public, says live on both platforms. It's frustrating, because it's like this was a good sermon and we were doing well. I am gonna file a complaint. I mean, it won't make any difference. Should I not? Damn it, that really sucks. That really sucks. What really sucks about it is that it's basically just a terms of service violation when you think about it, because of if that at all, which there is actually no terms of service violation. The terms of service says that you can't be basically pirating movies, and we're using them under fair use, but that you can use clips under fair use. I did get a video, by the way, taken down. You guys remember at least one of my episodes, one of the broadcasts of Kai Schwimmer Knows Nothing. I'm discovering just now apparently that was taken down some point in the last week. Yeah. And it says it's partially blocked for copyrighted material. Copyrighted material. We were showing Kai's live stream. It's copyrighted by YouTube. The intellectual property owner on that is Google. You can't you can't let me promote your shit. Somebody needs somebody over there needs to fix how they decide what stays up, what comes down. Welcome. Hi, Trevor. How's it going? So anyway, in any event, pull our comments back up. Guys, welcome back in. Please comment on the live. Please like. Apparently we're getting in trouble for promoting Hollywood's movies. A movie that's 30 years old now. You're welcome, Universal. You're welcome, YouTube. But there are people who have uploaded whole scenes from this movie onto YouTube and just like leaving it out there. No copyright strikes for them. We just show it with a little bit of the sound once in a while and just short little clips from some of the best parts of the movie. And now we're getting copyright strikes. I'm telling you, it's because we have 1,000 followers. And then I started talking about things that are politically relevant. Again, anyway, I'm going to do it again. We're going to see if we're going to talk. We'll see if we get pulled down. If we get pulled down, I want you guys to all know I love your faces. If I get copyright strikes until this channel gets pulled from the web altogether, I want you to know that I really hope you guys will go and join us at corohor.org. I know that there are technical glitches and problems. That's because I do most of the things here at the Church of Corohor, and I get overwhelmed, and there's a lot to do. I sure would help appreciate as much help as I can. But I don't do half godless sermons, friends. I finish what I start. So here's the point. I had mentioned that in 2018, more people passed away from hunger than any year on record, mainly probably because they didn't keep very good records of that during the Great Depression. And then in 2019, we broke that record again. And 2020 again. By 2022, yeah, the number had doubled, more than doubled, from over 8,000 people in America to more than 20,000 people in America. And every year it has continued to increase again and again. Can you play Raiders of the Lost Ark now? I don't know who Angelo is, but you're funny. That's good. I would love to. I would love to play Raiders of the Lost Ark. But we're not gonna. We're not gonna do anything copyrighty. I'm just going to clarify again. I did not break the law. Now, I technically didn't break terms of service. It just pissed off a robot that thinks I might have. And we have enough of a viewership. We have enough subscribers that they actually care. Whatever. Okay. We'll see if they take down a whole bunch of our content. If they take down a whole bunch of our content, we may change platforms. I'm just saying it right now. I have a Vimeo account. We can just go to Vimeo. Is that what you want, YouTube? Is that what you want, Google? I pay I think like $300 a year to be able to go live on Vimeo, to be able to publish things on Vimeo for my clients. We could just switch to Vimeo, and I could switch over to saying, we're going live at the Church of Horror, and I can embed live streams from Vimeo. I only do it here on YouTube because we can generally get more audience, get more exposure. But it may be that in the future, we may have to do godless sermons just at korihor.org, in which case it would make sense for everybody to make sure that you sign up at korihor.org, even if it's as a friend of Korihor, which is free. I would ask you, please consider becoming a contributor, especially if you think one day you might consider becoming ordained in the Church of Korihor, or might join the fellowship of the Church of Korihor, which you do not have to do in order to be ordained. But especially if you want to start onto the path towards becoming a herald of reason, in which case definitely buy the $48 a year membership, or $4. You can also sign up for $4 a month. I mean, I think that's pretty reasonable. But at the very least, sign up for free at korihor.org in case we have to start doing these things at the actual website, which actually I would prefer, frankly. I'd rather if we did all of this at the website at korihor.org. And in which case, Google, I hope you like what you bought here, because this is, this may be the point at which I become one of many other creators who decides to vacate your platform because you're such dicks. Anyway. But between 2018 and 2022, every year, more people passed away as a result of these food stamp policies. More and more people passed away every single year from hunger. And then it kept going. 2023, 2024. We broke the record again and again. And mind you, that wasn't the Trump administration. That was the Biden administration. Now, I do want to give props. Joe Biden and the Democrats did try to change that. They did try to re-implement some policies and get food stamps back to where they had been before, or at least tried to mediate some of the damage. But to no avail, because, again, they didn't really hold a majority, at least a strong enough majority in either house to really get it done. And frankly, there are people who just don't care. If poor people, working class people, don't survive right now, we are in moral crisis. I'm having to constantly now check to make sure that my live is actually up. This sucks, man. I see why people decide not to do this anymore. any of it. We're in moral crisis here in this country. And now we have people who can't go onto the streets exercising their Second Amendment rights. I thought that people who generally disagree with me politically on things were all about Second Amendment rights. And now we have an ICU nurse who was not threatening anybody, but just packing heat as he legally is allowed to do, constitutionally is allowed to do, and being shamed on every side by people who are supposedly Second Amendment activists, people who believe passionately in the right to bear arms. Oh, unless you're somebody who disagrees with me politically on this one issue, in which case, all the freedom for me and none for thee. And if you see, and if you watch the videos, you can see very clearly in the video from what happened yesterday that these agents took this man's firearm out of his holster and one of them took off with it. And then they ended him. It was shocking, even compared to Renee Good. Even compared to Renee, it was like, what the hell is going on? This is a moral crisis in which people are now upset, more upset than ever before. I went on TikTok last night and reacted to a crash out by one of these conservative TikTokers I follow. Now this one blatantly was me using my platform, my TikTok platform, as I often do, to make commentary, because I believe that some political commentary is actually moral. And I have had to come around on that. I had said before, I'm just going to keep these completely separate. But the fact of the matter is, there's a point at which we have crossed over from, this isn't about how you vote. This isn't about what party you belong to, which, by the way, I don't belong to any party. Just full disclosure, I have as many issues with the Democratic Party as I do with the Republican Party. And again, I'm just disclosing my bias. Don't expect anybody to change their votes, change how they vote. But I do generally vote Democrats, but not always. I mean, well, I always vote Democrat, but I don't vote Democrat down the ticket. In one certain election year, I'm not proud right now to say, but I will tell you the truth. I didn't vote for president. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I regret that now, but I own up to it. Yeah, so there we are. But my point there is simply to maintain, this isn't about politics at some point. At some point, it's about the morals. It's about the difference between whether or not we as human beings remember that what's important in this life are these human beings, is that you and I have experiences where we suffer. And it turns out it was of all people in history, perhaps the most significant atheist, at least atheist by some people's standards. He wouldn't have considered himself atheist by any stretch of the imagination, I'm sure. If there were such a word in Sanskrit, I don't even know if there is, for it, was Siddhartha, the Buddhagupta, the man himself, the original Buddha, the Nepalese prince, who, in one word in Sanskrit, Dhaka, described the first noble truth of Buddhism. I put to you as the first noble truth of anything, all philosophy, the first noble truth of all religion, including, by the way, Judaism, which has very strong Buddhist influences in it, and is ultimately the central crisis of everyone's lives, of the lives of all human beings. Turns out to be one word in Sanskrit, Dhaka. And that one word, that one principle, as defined by Siddhartha, the Buddha, means all that is born suffers. It turns out that is not only That's not a Buddhist principle. It's not even exclusively a religious principle. It is the most consistent truth of the experience of all human beings from time immemorial, is that we will all suffer. And every one of us individually knows our individual pain. We all of us individually know what I describe the four. Is somebody trying to get in? Doors open. There are four main crises that every person passes through in their life. We all wind up experiencing anxiety about mortality at some point, and we have to get over it because you'll be afraid to live. If you're too afraid to die, you're going to be too afraid to live. All of us have anxiety about freedom or choice or responsibility, is how sometimes they put it. In other words, again, you have to get over the fact that you can't go back. You cannot go back and do anything over again. And if you let that anxiety paralyze you from doing anything, that's worse. The worst thing to do in almost every situation is nothing. Even when you choose to step back and let things transpire, you have to choose the moment when you do that. Even when you meditate and say, okay, let these feelings come up, let these thoughts come up, let that perpetual cycle of anxiety peak, and ping and ping and ping and ping and ping, and just live through it, just get through it. That has to be an active choice. So even, the people will say, in the new age world, I sometimes, as somebody who works a lot in new age work, in my day job, I will sometimes refer to it as wooey, but it is important work. And I feel privileged to be working with people who do that in my day job. And I do think, while I am a very science minded person, I'm a very logic driven person, very autistic. I do think that there are people in this world who do spiritual work that is not entirely driven, that while it is scientifically valid, scientifically verified, it is not scientifically driven like what we do at the Church of Korihor. And even what we do is not, it's usually, oftentimes it's the science is on the back end, it's in the experience. But even when you do this, people say you got to let go of the doership. Don't be doing things. You got to let some things, you just got in that moment, you got to be part of the everything, be part of the now, seek for nirvana, seek for that peace, right? Let go of the material, let go of the individual responsibility. But that's only in individual moments. Now, maybe if you're just a monk sitting there trying to, be one with everything, for several hours a day, cool. But at some point, you got to march. At some point, you've got to eat. At some point, you've got to, or if you choose to stop eating, you've got to choose to fast. At some point, the doership, you realize that even when you choose to do nothing, you're choosing to do something. And that freedom to be able to choose what you're going to do, if you become so paralyzed with fear because you realize that's it, whatever I do now, whatever I choose to do, that is what I have chosen to do. If you, just like the crew of Apollo 13, if you lose that responsibility to say, do something here, even if you choose to do nothing because you choose to do nothing, because you choose to just let this happen, that it's better to let this happen than to get in its way. Apparently my battery's dying. My phone. I think we're okay. You have to choose it. If you can't take responsibility for your own life and say, I'm going to choose every moment what to do, the anxiety is crippling. It is extremely disempowering. And so that's the second crisis. The third crisis is isolation. The realization that you never do anything except you do it alone. Even when you have emotional support, which is great, and we should be there for each other as often as we can. Even if you have people in your life who love you and care for you, which if you do, blessings to you, that's fantastic. I'm very fortunate to have that in my life and in abundance. But nobody experiences your anxiety for you. You ultimately do it alone. And at the end of your life, while I am confident that there is not even so much as a dial tone at the end of life, I feel very much like Korihor says in the Book of Mormon, of all things. It says, well, it's now also in the Korihor canon, which I am soon going to get updated on the website. And it says that Korihor caused many of the women, yea, also the men, in case it's not clear, to commit many whoredoms. Don't threaten me with a good time. Telling them that when a man was dead, that was the end thereof. Yeah. Is that what Korihor said? No. Korihor is a fictional character and one of my favorites. Of all the beings from all of these stories, Star Wars, Star Trek, I love me some science fiction. I love me the myth, the legends of great astronauts like Jim Lovell. My God, but this guy's story. And how much of it is actually myth? A lot of it. How much of it, didn't actually happen? I'm sure more than we know. People have pointed out that in Lost Moon, one of my favorite books, Jim Lovell, flat out lied in parts, either flat out lied or made mistakes in his retelling. But he was just retelling it from his point of view. Even in, but he understood that he only knows things from his point of view. Every one of us, all we know about life is from our own point of view. On board the Iwo Jima, so many of the sailors on the carrier that picked up Apollo 13's crew, the sailors had no idea what was going on in the media because, out at sea back in 1970, they were cut off from the world. They're not sitting there watching TV all the time. They're not sitting there reading the paper, getting the paper. They're out on deployment on the high seas. And so up until they made it back to Hawaii, it was when they got to Honolulu and get off of the ship that Jim Lovell says that it was the first time that and he got off the ship and saw that all of their wives were there, except for Jack Swigert, who isn't married. He actually said in this quote I read just this morning, and he said they actually even got Jack Swigert's parents to fly out to Hawaii instead of his usuals, which were Pan Am stewardesses. I don't think he said Pan Am, but stewardesses is what he said. Jack Swigert was apparently a bit of a playboy. And he says, it wasn't until that moment that I realized that everyone on Earth had been watching what we were doing. Remember, they did a broadcast from space, and this did happen, and they did pretty good service for it in the movie. That they broadcast from space, but by this time, the third mission to land on the moon, the broadcasters had said to NASA that the idea of going to the moon, that they wouldn't broadcast the astronauts this time. Now, when it was Apollo 11 and, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, sure, yeah, everything that they broadcast, if they can get that broadcast live from space, everybody was about it. But by the time you got to the third mission to the moon on Apollo 13, they said it was about as exciting as a trip to Pittsburgh. Ouch. No shade on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a pretty interesting place. Anyways, they're good people. Good people in Pennsylvania. I said it. Come after me in the comments, and please hit the like button. Hit subscribe, even if we're not going to be long here on YouTube. We'll see. We will be. Okay, but that's that third crisis. Okay, ultimately, at the end of the day, just like the astronauts on Apollo 13, you don't know what somebody else is going through exactly entirely. It's obvious to us, or it should be obvious to us, and we should always be improving our emotional intelligence. And I try to, I know, and it's not easy every time. Sometimes it's easier to shut down. Sometimes it's easier to look at things like what happened yesterday in Minneapolis and say, I give up. I can't tell you how many times I see these comments on my videos on TikTok or here on YouTube, or how many times I get people in my personal life who tell me, Joe, I look at it now and I'm so desensitized to it. I say, yeah, well, that makes sense. And I see you, nurse. He's gone now. Well, that's just the world we live in now. We can become so overwhelmed by the travesty of life and even the cruelty of other human beings that our brains, our nervous systems have evolved to try and avoid the danger, even the perception of the danger, to the point that we can say that our brains shut down the prefrontal cortex and the circuits in our brain that say everybody ought to care about each other. That person is suffering like I suffer. This person suffers like I suffer. One of the videos that has been the most popular, I'm shocked to have seen, it was me wearing a color that's not very flattering on me, pink. But I had bought this because somebody, so many times people said, you should wear pink. Okay, it doesn't look great. Are you real? I don't know. I don't know who's real and who's bots, guys. But welcome, friends. If you are real people, you're welcome here, and if you are bots, also welcome. But I had made this video talking about Troy Abels. If you don't know Troy Abels, who recently passed, he's a Mormon YouTuber. How much am I going to reveal here? He's a Mormon YouTuber who was Tim Ballard's mouthpiece. He had this podcast called The Last Dispensation Podcast. And Tim Ballard, who is an a-hole, you heard me, Tim Ballard. I'm standing by to receive your cease and desist letters, because he is factually an asshole. Tim Ballard of Operation Underground Railroad, The Sound of Freedom, The Sound of Grift. He is a dick. The Mormon Church is better off without him. There, I said it. And the Mormon Church kicking him out, apparently on the same basis which they kicked me out, makes total sense to me. It made sense to me that they excommunicated me for apostasy, but that guy for apostasy, absolutely. I mean, me, all I did was say that there was no God and that Joseph Smith had an affinity for young girls. Factually accurate. Mormon Church will kick you out for that, apparently. Tim Ballard, on the other hand, claims that when he was excommunicated, a picture of Christ fell off the wall in the church house, and that he knows that was a sign from God that Jesus Christ had left the building. Okay, and here's the wild thing. I bet you he believes it too. What the hell, man? In any event, his main mouthpiece on the internet for a long time, and one that I covered in some episodes of Hellfire Agency, they revealed a guy named Pedro they had interviewed from Colombia. And this is the same Pedro who ended up signing a document basically saying that everything in the Sound of Freedom movie was bullshit, that he was one of the victims. That same guy, they went on Troy Abel's podcast to say, Tim Ballard's a good guy. Tim Ballard's taking care of me. I've gone around the world talking about this movie. Now, if you want to talk about movies, we talked about how this movie that we were watching, only clips from Google, that this, and all under fair use, Google, this movie is a little bit Hollywoodized. The most Hollywooded movie is coming from a guy who aspired to be in Hollywood for 30 years. Maybe this is the reason why I didn't do it. The most Hollywoodized movie I think I have ever seen is Sound of Freedom. Almost everything in that movie, which is a good movie actually, but it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. I mean, they were lying from the word go. Everything about it is false. And but the kid, the little boy that Tim Ballard steps up and tells one of the traffickers, he's like, you don't want this one. He's mine. That guy went on Troy Abel's podcast to say, Tim Ballard has helped me. He's given me money. He's helped me with therapy and things like this and so forth. He wasn't, by the way, like a 10-year-old kid. He was like 17. He was there with his boyfriend, and they had gone to a party, and nobody harmed them apart from there's a moment where they said that it became obvious to him that he and his boyfriend and their friends were being presented to Tim Ballard and his Mormon buddies as if they were meat in a meat market that they could buy. And he said, and that took him a decade of therapy to get through being presented and used that way. I don't disbelieve it, actually. But then everything he said on Troy Abel's podcast, this is the reason why I covered it on my show. And even the first time I'd ever heard of Troy Abel's Last Dispensation podcast was that this guy basically showed that everything that Tim Ballard claims is made up. It's all BS. And that's when things really started to fall apart for him, was when he went on Troy Abel's show. After that, he went on Troy's show, and Troy was all about it. Troy Abels believed everything Tim Ballard said. And he went out there. Well, I said I wasn't sure how much of this I would reveal. I reached out to Troy Abels more than once to say, come on my show at Hellfire Agency. I'll be nice to you. I know I'm an ex-Mormon. I know I'm an anti-Mormon, and you are LDS. I promise you I will be nice to you. I promise you that if you say you don't want to broadcast something or you don't want to answer a question, I won't pressure you. Please come on my program. I want to talk to you about this situation with Tim Ballard. I want to get the truth. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I want you to prove me wrong. He never responded to me. I feel certain he did receive all my messages because he apparently reached out to a mutual creator on YouTube. And that person contacted me and said, I don't think Troy will ever do your show because he is afraid. And I said, of me or of Tim Ballard? And this mutual friend said, of his faith. And I said, well, that's the impression. This isn't a word for word transcript. I said, okay, explain that. And he said, Troy doesn't know that Tim Ballard is right. And he suspects that Tim Ballard is a liar. And I said, what? And this mutual friend said, yeah, Troy thinks that maybe he is worried that he may be on the wrong side. I guess we can turn this off. That he's worried that he's on the wrong side when he platforms Tim Ballard. And I said, tell him to stop doing it. Tell him to stop doing it because the Mormons are raising money for him. And he is going to get himself into legal trouble. This isn't about me telling him what to do or not to do. This is about me as a concerned person looking at Troy and saying, don't do it, man. Don't put yourself at more risk. Don't put your family at risk. The guy obviously didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I may be wrong about that, but he obviously did not have a lot of money. And he had a lot of problems. Family issues. I don't want to bring up all the gossip I heard about it, but when I heard about it, I went, well, these are human things. Troy Abels suffered with a lot, and I should not care if I were sitting here doing what we often do and saying, well, he walked into it and saying, and just shutting off from all of my feelings and saying, well, screw him. He platforms this guy who's a total trafficker and a grifter, but when I learned about some of the struggles, the personal trials that Troy Abels was dealing with in his personal life, and I won't re-air it because again, the man passed just a couple weeks ago. It broke my heart, and cold-hearted atheist that I am, I have a heart. And frankly, I have more heart. I'm not trying to brag, but I think I have more heart than most Christians I know and have heard of. Certainly most people, frankly, I've heard of. And I've had to work at that. I've had to learn how to open my mind. I've had to learn how to develop my emotional intelligence, be aware, and allow myself to not be overwhelmed by that anxiety, which, especially with my autism, can peak early and often. I had to learn how to make room in my awareness and my consciousness, my experience, to be able to say, I am not the only one out here experiencing this anxiety. And my heart opened up to Troy Abels. And I said, well, let us not speak any ill of him if he is going through these trials. And I knew for a year that Troy Abels was in serious emotional anguish because of trials in his personal life, which again, I won't air here. While we say that Troy Abels was sick, and I do think he was sick, I haven't said what he was sick with. I know that he had physical ailments. But from what I understand, it wasn't those physical ailments that ended him. It was emotional ones. And I hope you guys understand that I don't bring that up to make fun of him. I know that call so intimately. A large part of the reason why I created the Church of Korihor was because of that call in my life. And the progress, very hard progress, that I have made to not answer that call. When I said a couple of weeks ago, when I published a video the day that I learned that Troy had passed, and how, I made a video similar to the one that I had made for the Mormon apostle Jeffrey R. Holland, who I do not feel nearly as much empathy for, saying for a short period of time, in respect to the grievance, to the grief and bereavement of his congregation and his family, I won't speak ill of him. That time has passed for Jeffrey R. Holland, who was a dick. I gave him some room. That Mormon was an a-hole. He was a real jerk. And I understand that he went through pain. I understand he went through suffering like any one of us. And I give him room to say he was doing the best. I think he was doing the best that he could. But he was doing the best he could on behalf of a corporation, a corrupt and wicked corporation that has hundreds of billions of dollars they could be using to end suffering around the world at a pace much larger than what they are doing, and they choose not to because they are a for-profit business, which the Church of Korihor is not. Is one of the many ways in which the Church of Korihor is a more virtuous organization. Somebody fight me, Curtin McConkie, send me your letters, your cease and desist letters. I said it. I said it now. I said it with my whole chest. I've said it before. I'll say it again. If you can sue me and the Church of Korihor out of existence, I'll say it again. That this is the Church of Korihor is a more virtuous organization than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It has been from the beginning. And I know because I'm the one who's in a position to know. Jeffrey R. Holland stood up for him, for that church and that organization, and stood against people who are gay, stood against people who are trans, stood against people who are black. Jeffrey R. Holland was part of the problem. I gave him room. when he passed, to say that doesn't mean he wasn't a human being. That doesn't mean that his experience isn't isolated. It doesn't mean that he probably was scared at the end. And it doesn't mean that we are better people for glorying in that he is gone or that he suffered. I certainly wouldn't consider myself better for all the times I have done that. And frankly, there was more than one moment since he passed that I thought, good, world's a better place without him. And I feel guilty every time. But the fact of the matter is, I do think in however that calculus is, the world is a better place without Jeffrey R. Holland in it. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is better off without Jeffrey R. Holland in it. Again, I said I'd give him some time. That time has lapsed. Troy, that season is still in effect. And so I will only say, again, and I'm getting off of this because I know I'm on to hear what happened. Because after I learned that Troy wasn't convinced entirely that Tim Ballard was being honest, or at least that he had told a mutual friend of ours that he believed that Tim Ballard was not being honest. I said, shit. And here I was saying and feeling about him that this was a guy who was just basically in a cult, the Tim Ballard cult, which is really the Visions of Glory cult, the Mormon prepper cult within a cult. And he doesn't know how to think for himself, obviously. He obviously doesn't employ any critical thinking. And it turns out I was wrong. He does. But he had moments of vulnerability. And Tim Ballard, apparently, from what I understand through a mutual friend, took advantage of that and convinced him, a man who obviously was very persuadable, by somebody who could tell him, you're doing something meaningful. That you're doing something that's saving children's lives and saving them from exposure to harm. That you're doing this and it's good, and I am the good guy, and the church is the bad guy. Convinced Troy that the church he belonged to, that the Mormon church, was in the wrong. And that church was this man's whole life. It was his whole reason for meaning in life. And Tim Ballard convinced him, I am right and the church is wrong on this, but whatever. And Troy Abels brought him back. When Tim Ballard, everybody thought that's it. That's the end of it. That is the end of Tim Ballard. We'll never hear of him again. We'll never hear of Operation Underground Railroad again. We'll never hear the stupid Sound of Freedom movie ever again. It was Troy that brought him back. Because Tim has this gift of grift to convince vulnerable people that he can give them meaning that they're even not getting at church. And Troy was very vulnerable. And apparently he succumbed to that vulnerability. And it breaks my heart for him. It really does. In any event, there's this moral argument for the existence of God. And you'll hear it again and again come up in debates and arguments from apologists who will tell you a person who tells you they believe in right and wrong, or believe that Christians are doing something that's morally wrong, or Jews or Muslims or any other group, that religious people do right or do wrong. Anybody who tells you that and then claims they don't believe in God is a liar, because only God can tell people what's right and what's wrong, because there is no supreme judge if there is no God. As Korihor said, that when a man dies, that is the end thereof. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This has been the longest grift in Judaism and Christianity, which is and Islam. You will hear Muslims make the same case. Let them enjoy their religion. Let them enjoy their meaning in life. More power to them to find meaning in judging us as if we are bad people in spite of all the things they have done in the name of their God, good and bad. But I can tell you this right now. When people say to me, how do you define what's right and what's wrong? If there is no supreme judge, if there is no supreme lawgiver, and I say this is about something entirely deeper than morality. It's about anxiety. People say, "What do you?" Okay, don't change the subject. It's not change the subject. It's the same subject. It's exactly how religion, as we understand it today, started, and the reason why even godless people need a church, like the Church of Korihor, and that is the Daka. All which is born suffers. Siddhartha had it right. The other three noble truths of Buddhism, meh. All the other principles of all these other religions, these God-driven religions, meh. There's good and there's bad. But that one point, even philosophers, even my favorite philosopher of all time, Arthur Schopenhauer, who studied Eastern religion, who studied Buddhism and Taoism, and wanted to know and understand the Daka and meditate. And I am convinced probably was autistic. You read his story, this man, this was one autistic noodle, Schopenhauer. And I love that about him. But even he was trying to solve the same problem and these same four crises. And the fourth of those crises, I mentioned three. The fourth of those crises is absurdity, which is that at the end of the day, if you ask yourself, is all of our pain and all of our suffering, is it actually meaningful to the universe? Does the meaning that we derive from our own pain and suffering, does it survive after we are dead? And the answer, frankly, as far as anybody can tell, is no. That when we pass, all of this stress, all of this anxiety about who are we? What is it? What am I here for? Why is it that this is happening? What is supposed to be happening? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Every time that a person says, "Here I am, I'm 30 years old and unmarried. I'm never going to have a baby. I'm never going to have offspring. Am I doing what I should be doing in my life?" Every time that you have somebody who, if you've ever had a miscarriage or supported and loved someone through a miscarriage, one of the most difficult trials I've ever experienced in my life remotely was supporting my precious Molly through our one miscarriage. And when I tell people about it now, I tell especially people who have personally miscarried about how difficult this one miscarriage was, and how many times I learned from somebody that I went through, like people who say I went through like 3, 4, 5 of those. I have people who say I tried for 5 years and it was one miscarriage after another. And yet these people who have this personal experience of so much anguish and pain, and have room of anybody to say, "You went through one miscarriage, boo boo, poor baby." And those people, you look in their eyes and there is nothing but sympathy there. And they say, "I can't imagine." Even though they can imagine what it was like for them. They can remember what it's like for them over and over again. And yet they look at that and they say, nobody should ever have to live through that. Nobody should ever have to bury their child. It's another one, especially a child who chose to leave this world. And that's the thing that many of us, many of you out there know that experience, have had that experience in your life, or know somebody. I know I have experienced it, seen it in my life. And none of us want to believe that it's real. And that's why I say anxiety robs our lives of meaning, makes us feel like we are lost, and can paralyze us from doing anything, because we realize ultimately it is absurd. And that nihilistic perspective of life is what drives so many people back into the arms of religion and go from church to church to church. They go from religion to religion to religion to religion. They go from God to God to God to God, looking for anything except for this nihilistic truth, which is true. I tell people all the time, nihilism is not scary. It's just true. Our suffering is absurd to the universe. But the thing to remember is that while you are in the universe, you are not the whole universe. You are a world. It's a great song by Slipknot, one of my favorite songs. It has a chorus. What's the name of the song? Um, Anyways, but the chorus goes, "I am a world before I am a man." That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Heavy metal. This heavy metal song contains a truth that is deeper than anything you'll read in the Bible. I'm convinced. Certainly deeper than anything ever taught by Jesus. I am a world before I am a man. That's exactly Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation is all about that. And I think it's one of the most important truths that anybody can learn. It certainly has been the most impactful, important lesson of my life. I am a world in and of myself. And when my brain ceases my synapses cease to fire, that world goes away because I never understood the world or knew the world except by what I could conceive of in my brain and what I could receive through the signals of my senses. I am a world before I am a man. And in the end, that world ends with us. But that means that if you seek for meaning in your life, instead of getting hung up on the fact that that meaning, whatever meaning for your suffering, ends when you end, realize just exactly what I've said again and again. That as far as your world, everything you do, any meaning you have to your suffering is your whole world. It's the whole world. And so when I look at Troy Abels and I think this is a man who was haunted by serious demons. And so was Jeffrey R. Holland. The difference is that I saw Troy Abels make the mistake of thinking that Tim Ballard and the church and his faith in God were going to give him a way of alleviating suffering. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen outside of his own mind. And his mind was haunted by these demons. And when I look at that and I think Joe Rollins isn't so different from Troy Abels. If there was a Jesus of Nazareth, and again, I'm convinced there probably was not, he would have had the same problem. It's not as if Jesus could have avoided it. Siddhartha, the Buddha himself, struggled with the same thing. He called it the first noble truth of Buddhism for a reason. He was going through it. And so when people ask me, how can you know what's right or what's wrong without God? How do you know what is meaningful without a heaven or a hell to aspire to or to fear? I say, I remember that I flash in the dark. We have this brief moment where you didn't have to exist, but you do. And in that brief moment, you can ramp up your anxiety or you can find meaning and diminish your anxiety so that you have enough room in your consciousness that you can do something. Just like Apollo 13, if you can't get enough amps back into the batteries, it does not matter that you did the final burn with the coas that allowed you to return back to the right angle or better angle to Earth so that you didn't skip off the atmosphere. Okay, but if you don't correct that angle, that reentry, if you overcorrect it so that you're coming in too steep, you'll crush when you get into the atmosphere, or worse, you'll burn up in the atmosphere. Well, actually, I don't know. Those are both pretty bad. You got to be able to get enough amps back into the batteries to be able to say, let's get this guidance computer running long enough to adjust our reentry angle so that all of it was worth it. At the end of the day, our lives are reentry. We are trying to get home again. And if we allow the anxieties of our problems, just like Fred Hayes' pneumonia, just like Ken Mattingly's not getting the measles, and we look at it and say, why is everything against me? Why is everything against us? Why is it that I'm the one? What we look for patterns in our minds. Our minds have evolved to look for community and to look for the minds of other beings. And what makes suffering seem sometimes even worse is to say, someone chose to inflict me with this. Somebody chose to give me this problem. We want to believe that there is a mind at work and look up to the fates, to the stars, to the gods, and say, what did I do that I deserve this? Just like Ken Mattingly, not getting the measles, but having to be back home, back in Houston, when it turns out that it became an opportunity for Ken Mattingly to save the day. Ken Mattingly, by the way, Jack Swigert never returned to space, and neither did Jim Lovell. Ken Mattingly, who had to stay grounded because he had the measles, he became the command module pilot for Apollo 16. He probably would have gone on to do more missions, but they canceled the Apollo missions. And he was one of the last men to ever go to the moon, even though he never walked on the moon. He commanded the command module pilot. He was the guy who did orbit he performed, I believe, more than 500 orbits around the moon, waiting for the crew to come back so he could take them back home. And he delivered Apollo 16 to the moon and back again. And then he went on to command 2 space shuttle missions. And it was a good thing that he was on the ground. After Apollo 13, they may have never sent men back to space. They may have said, look, we made it to the moon once. We beat the Soviets. After that, who cares? Which eventually they did with the Apollo missions. And many times they thought they were going to do with space shuttle missions. Eventually, they canceled the space shuttle missions because of the same thing. They couldn't lose one more. It was bad PR for the administration. It's bad PR for America to lose astronauts in space. These men knew what they signed up for. This was what was meaningful in their lives. And that is us. That's every one of us. When that meaning, when you can't make enough room in your conscious space, can't get enough amps back in the battery to be able to calculate and move, make a choice, that's when you have already died. Remember my sermon, some of you who have been here long enough, I gave a sermon where I talked about Star Trek. Every time that somebody gets on the transporter pad on the Enterprise and beams down with the away team and beams back up again, technically they die because the body that they were living in is completely disintegrated and then reassembled as a clone and then disassembled and then reassembled. How then is it that people get over what in Star Trek they call transporter phobia? Is that they tell them, look, you're doing this already. Every cell in your body is regenerating all the time. And you are being beamed, but instead of being beamed up or being down, you're being beamed forward in time. And your body is reconstructing it. And you never, in any of that moment, never does it occur to you, I think, to think that you are no longer the being that was born in your mother's womb, right? You're still convinced you are the same person, even though every cell in your body has been replaced with another one, at least, a few times. You're being beamed forward in time, and you're convinced that you were you. You are still you. And the reason why you're convinced that you are still you is the exact same reason why a crew member on the Enterprise is convinced that they are still them. And that's because you remember who you were. You remember how you feel, how you react to things. You remember your anxieties, your concerns. You remember what causes you suffering and pain. You remember what gives you meaning in life. And you move forward with that story. You are a story that knows it's a story and wants to know what happens next in your story. Because if you don't, if you allow anxiety to paralyze you and say, "Oh, I don't want to make the wrong choice," or, "Oh, I don't know that I can do anything if it all turns out that the universe doesn't ultimately care what I do." Or if you say, "Well, if we all die in the end, what difference does any of it make? Might as well not even do anything." Those are the moments where your nervous system very naturally is saying, "Oh, I let go of it. I'm overwhelmed." Those are the moments where we stop doing things that are important and good and meaningful in our lives. So you can't let that overwhelm happen. That's why it's important to do overview. That's why it's important to meditate. It's why it's important to take moments to take a step back and say, all that is born suffers. But here I am for this short period of time. I can do something. I can reduce and alleviate the suffering of another person. When you feel like you don't know anything meaningful in your life, can I give you a piece of advice? Go get a blanket and give it to somebody who is sleeping in the streets. Change your life. Go and get a little bit of money. You could give it to the Church of Korihor, we'll take it. But if not, fine, take a little bit of money, whatever you have that you can spare, and go and find somebody who's run out of gas and say, "Can I help you? Can I buy this cart of groceries for you?" And see the gratitude in another human being's eyes, and you'll know that it mattered that you were here, and you'll be surprised how much of life makes sense and how easy it is to believe in morals and being a good person. Because of those rare moments. Amen. We're the Korihors, spiritual community for godless people. And we're going home.
Guide me by morning light, keeping home in my sight. With doubts and dreams take flight. We flash in the dark, so let's flash bright. On a mission to save ourselves, break with dogma with these shelves. My friend, if you choose to be free, I'll light your path if you'll walk with me. We're going home to where we'll find a world where life is worth the climb. One day we will crash and we will die. Oh, my friends, that's not tonight. No more shadows in our mind. Leave the fears and past behind. On this pale blue dot, we will make our stand. Light within, we will be your hands. We're going home to where we'll find a world where life is worth the climb. One day we will crash and we will die. Oh, my by math and science, our path is clear. Strangers once, our re-entry nears. Sighting land, we'll quit this sea. I'm going home, who will come with me?